Let me tell you about something that happened during my college years. I'm not a great writer, but I'll do my best to explain. Back when I was in college, those years were some of the best of my life. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy with my life now, but those memories are really special. My advice to anyone still in college is to enjoy it because it goes by fast. I went to a college that was right by the beach. Our campus was literally on the water. This story happened when I was pledging for a fraternity. If you don't know, pledging is like an initiation that lasts a semester for everyone who got accepted into the fraternity. A lot of what happens during pledge is better left unsaid. Anyway, it was the last week of pledging before we officially became brothers. Usually, the fraternity makes the final week really tough. For us, it was known that we'd have to do the beach challenge. Here's what happened. The brothers drove our whole pledge class about 15 miles down the coast on a Friday night. Then, we had an hour to finish a big keg filled with who knows what. After that, they walked us to the beach, tied our wrists together, blindfolded us, took our phones, watches, and shoes, and left us there. We had until sunrise to make it back to the house, or we'd all be dropped. I was pretty nervous about this, but there was nothing any of us could do. I remember it being strangely chilly that night, but the excitement of becoming a brother kept me going. The keg was the easy part. We had gotten used to sharing the alcohol and throwing up if needed. There were 15 of us. After tying us together, the brothers blindfolded everyone but Michael, who was at the front of the line. He was our eyes, but that was the only help we got. Our pledge master was a big guy named Carlos, but he made us call him Big C. He was strange. He explained the rules one last time, and then left with the other brothers. We started walking, with Michael leading us. Without our phones, we had no idea how far we were going or how much time we had left. All we could do was keep walking. At first, we tried to make it fun by talking and joking, but that got old fast. After what felt like 2 hours, we were walking in silence, stopping occasionally for someone to throw up. I started to zone out. Even the sound of the ocean faded as I walked, lost in my thoughts. Suddenly, I felt a sharp tug on the rope around my wrists. I took a few big steps forward and stopped, thinking David, who was in front of me, had fallen. David was kind of clumsy, so it wasn't surprising. I didn't have the energy to ask if he was okay, so I just waited. I must have stood there for a full minute. Something felt wrong. I was about to say something when the rope pulled tight again. I started walking, relieved that David hadn't passed out. We kept walking, and I drifted back into my thoughts. I was exhausted and prayed we were almost done. Just then, I took another step, but instead of hitting damp sand, my foot splashed into a thin layer of ocean water. I took a few more steps, and the water got deeper, reaching my ankles. I was confused. Why was Michael leading us into the water? The rope pulled tight again, so everyone else was still walking. So I did too. Maybe someone needed to wash off their feet, I thought. If no one else was complaining, I wasn't going to either. The water stayed at ankle height for a while, moving with the waves. Then it started rising to my shins. Michael was definitely messing with us, but I didn't understand why. Wasn't this challenge hard enough? Then, I heard a faint sound in the distance. It was the sound of a boat engine. As we kept walking, it got louder, meaning it was getting closer, or we were getting closer to it. I was getting really uncomfortable. The water was almost up to my knees. Finally, I broke the silence. Guys, what the hell are we doing in the water? I asked. No one answered. I asked again, more concerned. Still nothing. Panic started to set in. I had to see what was going on. I reached up to undo my blindfold, but the rope yanked my arms back down. I cursed and quickly undid the blindfold with my head down before the rope could pull away again. To my horror, David wasn't guiding me. Instead, I was staring at a middle-aged man holding the frayed end of the rope tied around my wrists. He had a long, rusty kitchen knife in his left hand. Past him, there was a boat with 3 more silhouettes on board. I screamed and yanked my arms up, kicking the man in the chest as hard as I could. The rope broke free from his grip, but he grabbed my shirt to break his fall. The fabric tore with a loud rip, and he fell into the water with a piece of my shirt. I ran toward the shore, my wrists still tied. I heard someone splash into the water behind me, but I didn't look back. I just kept running. I was about halfway to the sand when something whizzed past my head, inches from my ear. It was the knife. I watched it disappear into the water. I was in shock, but adrenaline kept me moving. I reached the shore and looked back. 2 men were in the water, and 2 were on the boat, just staring at me. The man closest to me still held the piece of my shirt. I didn't waste any time. I ran up the beach and made it to the street. By now, it was past sunrise, but my fraternity was the last thing on my mind. I flagged down a car and, after pleading, called the police. When the cops arrived, the men were gone, presumably off in their boat. I lied to the police about what happened, worried about repercussions for the fraternity. Luckily, they didn't ask many questions. I didn't get much crap from my fraternity brothers. They were more upset with Michael for not noticing what happened, though he swore he didn't hear anything. After that, I became a brother, and things went back to normal. Well, for a while. A few weeks later, some of us were playing beach volleyball behind the house when Jackson noticed something in the distance. There was a stick poking out of the sand, with a piece of cloth tied to it. It was the piece of my shirt. The design was unmistakable. To this day, I don't know how they knew which fraternity I was in. My brothers think they might have recognized the shirt, but I have a more sinister theory. I think they knew our fraternity would be sending pledges to the beach that night, helpless and blindfolded. They could have planned the whole thing around that tradition, waiting to kidnap whoever they could. I was just unlucky enough to be at the back. I still get chills thinking about it. I wonder what would have happened if I had gotten on that boat. The police never found anything. It's been years, but they never found those men. A few years back, when I was around 21, something super creepy happened to me, and I gotta get it off my chest. So, it was a warm summer night in a small town in the Midwest. I was hanging out with some buddies from college, just chilling and having a good time. We were all part of this fraternity, and let me tell you, the frat life was intense. Anyway, we were in the middle of our initiation process, and this night was supposed to be the final step before becoming full-fledged brothers. So, it's getting late, like around 11 p.m., and the older guys blindfold us and load us into their cars. We had no idea where we were going, but we were all excited and kind of nervous. After about 30 minutes of driving, the cars stop, and we're told to get out. We can hear the sounds of nature around us, so we figure we're somewhere out in the woods. They make us sit down and be quiet. I can feel the grass under me and hear my buddies shuffling around. Then, this deep voice starts talking about brotherhood and all that frat stuff. It's kind of weird, but we go along with it. After a while, things get quiet, and I start to feel uneasy. Suddenly, someone grabs my arm and pulls me up. They lead me away, and we start walking through the woods. I'm stumbling over branches and stuff, trying to keep up. At one point, the blindfold starts digging into my eyes, so I ask the guy to stop so I can adjust it. When I take it off, I'm face to face with this dude wearing a creepy mask. I freak out and start backing away, but he comes at me, yelling about taking me somewhere. We end up wrestling on the ground, and I manage to break free and run back toward where we came from. I can hear my heart pounding in my ears as I crash through the bushes, trying to get away. Eventually, I hear my friends calling my name, and I run into one of them. I tell him what happened, and he freaks out. They all rush into the woods with flashlights, looking for the guy in the mask. I'm left there, shaking and wondering what the hell just happened. We never found out who that guy was, or why he was out there in the woods wearing that mask. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and I still get chills thinking about it. It's been 12 years since I graduated from college. I went to Eastman Technical, a small school right in the heart of Chicago. Going to school in Chicago was amazing, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Back then, we didn't have many fraternities, so I joined one to make sure I had parties to go to. I was a pretty normal kid, so getting in wasn't too hard. Most of the pledge events were easy, but I soon found out what they were hiding. I hope I don't get in trouble for telling this story, but it was so long ago that I figure it's safe. I doubt my old frat still makes pledges do this. At least, I hope not. The big thing during our initiation was a subway crawl. There was an old, abandoned subway station that teenagers would explore. Our frat made us enter from an active platform, walk to the abandoned one, take some pictures, and then continue to the next active platform. We had subway schedules to make sure no train would come while we were on the tracks. We had plenty of time to get onto the abandoned platform, wait for a train to pass, and then move to the next station. We didn't have to run from a train. The route was planned well, and we had enough time to avoid the dangerous third rail. I loved urban exploring before college, so this was more exciting than scary for me. It was a random Tuesday at like 2 a.m. when our frat brothers made us go into the subway. They probably picked this time because trains were less frequent and we'd be safe. There were about 12 of us, and you don't need to know everyone's name, but my closest friend in the pledge class was a guy named Mike. He was the funniest guy ever, and my friends always said he should do stand-up comedy. He also smoked a lot of pot, which is important for this story. We made our way into the subway without any problems. Mike and I were at the back because everyone else was too scared. It was really dark, and we only had 2 flashlights to share. Those flashlights and a cheap film camera were all we had. I had one of the flashlights, but I quickly gave it up to a pledge brother who was whining about not being able to see. Not even 30 seconds into the walk, Mike had a genius idea. He pulled out a joint from his jacket and motioned for me to stop. "I don't have enough to share," he whispered, flicking his head towards the other guys who hadn't noticed us. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When would I get the chance to smoke in a subway tunnel again? We smoked while we watched the other guys get further away, their laughter faded. We finished the joint, and by then, we were far behind the group. Mike's stuff was really strong, and I was more out of it than I wanted to be. My tolerance wasn't as high as his. We picked up the pace to catch up, but then Mike noticed something in our way. Without a light, we could only see the silhouette of someone standing still in the middle of the track, facing us. It was creepy. Mike called out, "Chris?" His voice echoed in the tunnel. The person didn't respond. Just then, Chris's voice called back from further up the line. We froze. This person was a stranger. As soon as Chris called, the person started sprinting towards us. We turned and bolted back the way we came. I was high and panicking. The figure's sprint was silent, like we were being chased by a shadow. Mike's grip on my arm tightened. "Faster," he hissed, fear in his voice. We knew we had time before the next train, but running in the wrong direction felt wrong. Mike must have thought the same because he motioned for us to cross the divider onto a different track. In hindsight, we could have kept running back to the original station, but I was so high I just followed Mike. We crossed the divider and ran towards the abandoned station. It was terrifying because we didn't know when a train might come on this track, but at least we were heading in the right direction. I hoped Mike's maneuver was enough to shake whoever was chasing us, but it wasn't. The person also crossed the divider and kept running after us. There were only a few places to cross, so we had to pray we found another one before a train came. My heart was pounding, but we managed to widen the gap between us and our pursuer. We kept running, looking for a place to cross, with no luck. Then, the track started vibrating, and we saw light at the distant end of the tunnel. A train was coming. We were screwed. I considered turning and fighting whoever was behind us, but then Mike screamed, "Right here." He ran toward the divider. By some miracle, the next crossing point was right in front of us, and we crossed back to the original track. We sprinted another 30 yards and caught up with the rest of the guys on the platform. Mike explained the whole thing while I leaned over and threw up. Not even 30 seconds later, the train zoomed by on the other track. Mike and the rest were ready to confront whoever was chasing us, but no one showed up. We thought the worst, but then we heard another crazed yell from the distance. To this day, I still don't know how that person avoided the train. We waited for the train to pass on our track and then sprinted out of there. In hindsight, Mike and I probably just encountered some homeless guy who was drugged out and might not have even posed a threat. Fear took over in that moment, which explains the stupid decision to cross the divider. I'm sure we could have fended him off, but I'm glad we didn't have to. That night was wild. After we got out of the subway, we all went back to the frat house. Everyone was talking about what happened, and some of the guys were really freaked out. Mike and I were just glad we made it out okay. We never did anything like that again. I still think about it sometimes, and it still gives me chills. It was a crazy experience, and even though it was scary, it's kind of a cool story to tell now. But, yeah, I hope they don't make pledges do that anymore. It was way too dangerous.